Trump at this point doesn't have a lot of incentive to actually join the debate stage. He has universal name recognition. Maybe voters like him, maybe they don't. They have no question about who he is versus somebody like, say, former Congressman Will Hurd of Texas, or even somebody who's been on the national stage like Nikki Haley, the former South Carolina governor, who's been trying to get her name out there, and people might be more curious about what she's all about. So I think Trump sees it as punching down, and from his perspective, it's understandable.
Welcome to the Debrief, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the headlines they're covering this week and where the story's going next. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by magazine managing editor David Mark. David, we now have a fairly large Republican field for the 2024 presidential nomination, about a dozen candidates, but not very many of them seem to have much in the way of support. Talk a little bit about this sort of bottom-heavy Republican field that we seem to have.
Right. There's former President Donald Trump and everybody else to one degree or another. We had thought at this point the leading alternative to Trump would be Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. He still gets a lot of media attention. He's raised money, but there's a lot of doubts creeping up about him, about his actual campaign skills and really if he's what Republicans are looking for, which gives other candidates potentially a shot to at least get attention. Among those is South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, who is somebody who is talking about self-improvement. He's got a very aspirational, forward-looking message, quite different than Trump's kind of angry, divisive views, whatever your view, whether you like him or not. A lot of people like him for those very reasons. But Scott's more of a throwback to the Reagan era. Then you have some folks who held office back during the Clinton era, like Asa Hutchinson, the former governor of Arkansas, who was a House member back then, actually the impeachment manager of Clinton. And you get some really long shots like Doug Burgum, the governor of North Dakota, who I actually think has a bit of a calling card in that he's a very wealthy tech entrepreneur. And Republicans, a lot of their voters care about big tech and conservative bias. Not exactly a specialty, but I would actually think that might give them an opening. So a whole bunch of them as well out there.
Yeah, as you mentioned, a lot of these candidates are well credentialed. They certainly have plausible resumes for running for president. Yet when you look at them in the polls, with the real exception of Governor DeSantis, they're very far behind.
Right, and one that didn't even come to mind at the top of my head was former Vice President Mike Pence. You would think in almost any field, a former Vice President of the United States would rise to the top. But the fact that he was Trump's understudy and Pence has had his own conflicts and friction with Trump over January 6th and other matters, he's not really getting up there. He's not really doing much to differentiate himself from the field as well. So yeah, lots of these people have their own political profiles within their state, but trying to take that national is a whole other issue.
So it seems that a lot of people are operating under the assumption that at some point, all of the things that are on paper liabilities for Trump will catch up to him, and somebody has to be in a position to capitalize on that, and it doesn't look, at least up to this point, that DeSantis has been able to do that as well as a lot of people thought. So why not me?
Yeah.
But up to this point, that really hasn't materialized.
Well, that was effectively their strategy in 2016 when Trump faced 16 alternatives for the Republican nomination, and they wouldn't really go after each other, and they allowed him to walk through. I think he might have won out. Anyway, that's a whole other discussion.
Sure.
But yes, they're not really confronting him, with the exception of former Governor Chris Christie, who is really this in-your-face, very antagonistic candidate toward Trump. He's had his own personal histories with him. Whether that's what Republican voters are looking for remains to be seen, but it actually does differentiate him and makes him stand out in the field.
Now, some of them are hoping that they can get up on the debate stage with Donald Trump and be able to differentiate themselves that way, and also maybe be able to make a name for themselves by the way in which they contrast themselves to the former president. But Trump may have his own ideas about that.
Yeah, Trump at this point doesn't have a lot of incentive to actually join the debate stage. He has universal name recognition. Maybe voters like him, maybe they don't. They have no question about who he is versus somebody like, say, former Congressman Will Hurd of Texas, or even somebody who's been on the national stage, like Nikki Haley, the former South Carolina governor, who's been trying to get her name out there, and people might be more curious about what she's all about. So I think Trump sees it as punching down, and from his perspective, it's understandable. There's also this issue with the Republican National Committee about whether these Republican alternatives have to sign some kind of loyalty pledge to support the ultimate winner. And in a sense, it's a way of rigging the process for Trump, because, of course, they could say to him, well, if you sign a loyalty pledge, or you can't be our nominee if you're not willing to do that, even if you don't debate. But that's not likely to happen.
Right. I mean, some of these candidates, like Christie, for example, clearly he's premised on being an anti-Trump candidate, and yet at the same time his strategy is very dependent on actually being on that debate stage.
Well, that's right. That's the real conundrum for them. They also have to come up with a bunch of individual campaign donations, and they have to reach 1% in the polls, which doesn't sound like much, but it's not that easy when there's 12 people out there it's going after the scraps at that point.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
You can read David and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.